You're listening to 15 Minutes, where we feature community leaders sharing what the rest of us should know but likely don't. Hi, Chad Franzen here, one of the hosts of Share Your Voice, where we talk with top-notch law firms and lawyers about what it takes to grow a successful law practice. This episode is brought to you by Gladiator Law Marketing, delivering tailor-made services to help you accomplish your objectives and maximize your growth potential. To have a successful marketing campaign and make sure you're getting the best ROI, your firm needs to have a better website and better content. Gladiator Law Marketing uses artificial intelligence, machine learning, and decades of experience to outperform the competition. To learn more, go to gladiatorlawmarketing.com, where you can schedule a free marketing consultation. My guest today is Farley Weiss, president of Weiss and Moy PC, a law firm specializing in intellectual property matters. Farley has a background of more than 25 years in the industry. He has served as past president of the National Council of Young Israel, a major Jewish organization that oversees over 160 synagogues worldwide, representing over 25,000 members. With his extensive expertise and leadership roles in various organizations, Farley brings a unique perspective to the field of intellectual property law. Farley, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
It's great to be here. Thank you. How you doing?
Great. Thanks so much. Hey, tell me, how and when did you know you wanted to become an attorney?
Well, I grew up with parents who were both attorneys. As a matter of fact, my father, who we ended up joining his firm that he started, was a patent attorney. And my mother ended up becoming a judge, workman's comp judge, and then an immigration judge. It was an immigration judge for over 25 years. And so they both were attorneys and one a judge. And so it was really kind of natural to think to go into the same field as your parents were in. And they discussed legal issues and they seemed interesting to do. And I saw that my professional tennis career was not going well. So I got to 736 in the world and I was still far away from being top 100 and making any money at it. So I figured I better get a real job.
So how did you begin? How did you kind of begin your journey into the legal industry?
Well, I went to Arizona State Law School after graduating from the University of Pennsylvania. And then in my summer of my second year of law school, I actually ended up clerking at the Supreme Court in Israel as a volunteer law clerk for the Supreme Court, going through American law on cases that they had of first impression in Israel. Two of the cases, the main two cases I worked on were a case of a father who was 65 years old who was raising a mentally incompetent son who was 39 years old, and the father needed a kidney. And the question was whether the court would order the son to give him a kidney. And he had other children, two daughters. And so the lower court had said yes. And I had to check what U.S. law said, or whether you would, someone who couldn't make a decision on their own, whether they would force a decision. And mainly the courts in the United States had said they would not force the decision. And the Supreme Court said because there were other kids and he could possibly survive with a cadaver kidney, that they said that they would not order him to give his kidney, even though the father had taken care of him his whole life. And so I worked on that case a tremendous amount. And then another case I worked on was an Israeli family had adopted a Brazilian baby, and they did not realize that the baby was kidnapped by some group before they adopted it. And they had the baby for 2 years, and then the BBC did a story about it, found the parents, brought the parents to Israel, and the Supreme Court had to decide whether to give the baby back to the Brazilian parents or leave it with the Israeli parents. It became a more convoluted case because the Brazilian parents were not married, they were separate, they were, I think that the mother ended up putting another child up for adoption or something, and not, and so it was a question of whether they really cared so much about the kid. But the Supreme Court, I checked with other cases in America, held that it was still the biological parents and it should go back to them, even though it was a devastating thing because the other parents in Israel had you had to wait a long time at that time in Israel to adopt, like 10 years, and they couldn't have children. It was like their one child. And so it was a very sad case. But they felt like you can't just take the baby away from the biological parents, and they sent the baby back, which is what U.S. law held.
Wow. So those were two of the first cases you worked on.
Those are the two cases. Those are the main. I spent my entire time really on those two cases of what U.S. cases had to present to my judge that I worked for, who was the deputy president of the court, Menachem Elon. and bless his memory. And and so that was what I did during my time of that summer, and I got law school credit for it because I was a volunteer at the time, and so it was a very fascinating thing. And then that ended up, so then I ended up finishing law school and took the bar and passed, and went to work for my father's firm at the time, and then and I became doing trademark law of protecting names on products and services. So people have multiple products or services. Almost every business, either product or service business, it's important to protect your name. That's some companies, like Coca-Cola, for example, is the most valuable asset is their trademark.
What did you learn from that initial experience? Was there anything you took away from that initial experience with those two? Those are two kind of big cases. What did you learn from that experience that you still kind of take with you, if anything?
Well, I think that it was fascinating to hear how judges make decisions, and discussing a case with the judge of the thought process that someone at a very high level, to start off to hearing people at a very high level making very important final decisions where there was no court above them, to hear the kind of the thought process that went on, and to learn that right before I was even starting as a lawyer was really kind of an extraordinary experience to have. And that you see in the legal business that there are things that there's a lot at stake. And so for products that we have to protect the name for, it's a lot of people, it's very important they get their name protected. It's something that is critical to their business. And so it's important to try to do your best to get these to help the assist the clients with it.
So then you moved, as you mentioned, you moved into intellectual property law with your father. What do you enjoy specifically about that kind of sector within the legal industry?
I think that in our area of intellectual property, it's probably the happiest area of law. So, for example, if you're doing criminal law you're representing criminal defendants, almost everybody has committed a crime that is very unhappy to be there to see you. You're dealing with divorce people, they're not exactly generally happy to see you. You're dealing with bankruptcy, they're not exactly happy to see you. But with us, we're dealing with business people all the time. So it's always people excited about their new invention that we patent, excited about their new products that we trademark. And so you have people who are very happy, excited, who are many times going places. And you see, and you get at the ground floor and to take a name, and you go and try to predict the name, and all of a sudden you can see the name out there in the supermarket. And you see the name in the stores, different department stores or something. You see a name out there, and it's like, wow, I remember when they were thinking about this name or that name, and all of a sudden they pick this name, and this is where it is now. And so it's sometimes a little pressure pack that makes you try to get that name approved. And so I just got a name approved for a company, and they're like, well, we're a public company. It's a good thing you got that name approved. And it's like, oh, yeah, so it's sometimes a lot of pressure, but it's at the same time, you hear from people what's going on with their business and now what's happening with it. It's very fascinating. And generally, they're much happier clientele than a lot of times that the attorneys get people like, oh, I got sued, I need an attorney, and or someone did this to me, terrible, I need to sue. So we do some litigation, but it's just generally we have a happier clientele than most law firms have.
Yeah, I could see that. I would imagine. Can you share maybe a specific, at the risk of putting you on the spot, can you share maybe a specific case or case study that kind of highlights the importance of intellectual property protection?
Well, we have one crazy story of a case of a company called Filiberto's. It's a Mexican fast food chain. And they had a situation where a lawyer came in and mistreated them, in essence, took their business away from them. And they came to us, and the business ended up going into a bankruptcy court. And we partnered with another firm that had more experience with the bankruptcy, and we worked with the bankruptcy court to get the name back to the family that had originally owned it, and it was improperly taken from them, and it took a while, but we were successful in getting the name back to them and to the rightful owners. And it was crazy to see that someone had mistreated them like that, and it was kind of an experience to see how a bankruptcy court went. And but the nice thing is that we were able to get the name back to the rightful owners. It was actually family. So that was a very exciting thing, and Filiberto's has been a very successful and is even doing, I think, anything more successful today than it was then.
As you mentioned, after working as a student, you joined your father's law firm. He had been an intellectual property attorney. I'm guessing while the entire time you were growing up. What have you kind of learned from him as you've moved into this stage of your career?
I learned a tremendous amount from him. I had the great honor, not many people get to work with their father and learn a business from from your father. And I was very close with my father, and I learned many aspects of one of the aspects he said is that if there's a small problem, you got to deal with it, or else it'll become a big problem. It was very profound advice that I learned from him, and we had one of the things that unique about our firm is we do flat fees. So I think it's a much more ethical way to do business. And we had somebody once joined our firm from a big firm. And I said, how was it working with a big firm? He goes, well, one time they complained to me I did the work too quickly. Said you could have billed a lot more. I could have taken more time on it. And I said, with flat fees, we if it takes you more time or it takes you less time, it's the same fee. And the client doesn't complain because they know what they're paying. They say, why did it take you so long and why did it get such a big bill? So you can't really do that with litigation, but in our flat fee system, it's a much more ethical system, and because it's the problems that the firms is if they just keep billing hours and billing time and taking more time on things. And so I remember one person told me that he said, what's your billing rate? And this was already 30 years ago, and he was like $2,500 an hour. I go, what do you mean $2,500 an hour? He goes, well, when I discuss a case, I bring 3 lawyers with me in the room, and so they're all billing their hourly time with me. And so it's a kind of an extraordinary thing because you have the junior partner, this person goes to this person, that person. Here, it's for our firm, it's like the person you're working with, the person doing the work and on the thing, and you have a flat fee, and we very experienced getting this work done and getting these things approved for people.
Are there some challenges or a challenge that you've kind of faced in the field of intellectual property law that you've had to overcome? And if you did, how did you do that?
I mean, I think that the areas of intellectual property, the challenges you have is a lot of the challenges is someone doesn't always tell you the full picture, and so you get a story from a client, and then they say, yeah, someone infringed, and this is what they did, and then you contact the other party, and then they tell you a completely different picture, and so it's a very those are problems that you can have that are it's very hard to avoid those types of situations. You just try to say to them, ask them a bunch of questions. Are you sure this is the case? And are you sure about this information? So you can avoid that type of situation. But it's not as much as possible to try to make sure that your client is telling you the truth, because a lot of people are tell you what they want you to know, but not what you really sometimes need to know.
So at what point are you satisfied that you have the truth?
I think that look, you can't. The client doesn't want to pay for you to research so much and do so much information. I think the thing is that you have certain areas that as long as you feel like you've asked them the questions and they're giving you answers and told them, look, if you're not telling us 100% what's accurate, these are the different problems you could have, and these are the situations. And so you're sure you want to do this, that's there. But our experience generally, if we ask enough questions and they are that we avoid the problems that they would have. But once you have one experience of sending a cease and desist letter and the other person says, no, your client is the one who infringed our thing, you get more careful of how you listening to what the client tells you. And then the client says, yeah, well, I forgot to tell you that. I'm like, well, that was kind of a critical piece. So we've been able to avoid those by asking more questions. And so generally the other thing is that if you fall for one of those things one time, the main thing is try to make corrections so you can avoid it again in the future. And we've been, thank God, very successful in getting the patents approved for clients, getting the trademarks, and it's something that is we don't have too many of those types of situations. We don't have too much litigation. We more of doing the filing the applications for people, and it's great to see different successes on things.
Is the kind of the landscape of intellectual property regulations and laws continuously evolving? And if so, how do you kind of stay current with that?
So they don't evolve too much. But one problem, a significant problem that's happened with trademark law is that 4 years ago, you would file an application, and this was the case for 30 years. You would hear back in 3-4 months. All of a sudden, they said, we got all these Chinese applications, and now it's 8, 9, 10 months before you hear back. So all of a sudden, an application is taking 6, 8 months longer than it used to. And that was like in shock, because I would tell a client it's 3-4 months, and then all of a sudden they're like, it's like 6, 7 months, 8 months. Why haven't I heard back? And then they had this whole thing that they said, like a bizarre thing, that all these applications from China with Chinese words and Chinese things, like all of a sudden were inundating the trademark office, and there's been no satisfactory explanation I've heard about it. But that's been unusual. But my wife, who works for our firm and does immigration law, my wife Jessica, she has a very difficult area, because there the law changes all the time. So with trademarks and patent, it doesn't change much. One significant change in the patent business was that there used to be that it would get 18 years of protection after the issuance of a patent application, once it became issued. Well, what people did, and certain companies, they would delay the application to issue, and so all of a sudden the 18 years was 8 years after they filed instead of 2 years after they filed. So they got 18 years afterwards, and they saw a big benefit to it. So then they law change, instead it's 20 years after filing is what you get. So now you have a big incentive to try to get the applications approved as soon as possible, because you're losing time every day. And then you can actually, in the patent business, you can't do this really in the trademark business, but in the patent business, you can pay an extra fee and expedite the applications. You also can, if you're over 65, you can expedite the patent applications as well, with an extra fee. So you have 2 options that you can do.
Do you think that intellectual property plays a role in fostering innovation and economic growth?
It's a critical role. There's a famous story. I can't remember exactly who it was, who like in the late 1890s was like, everything that has been invented could be invented has already been invented, and it was one of the most ridiculous statements. Because a lot of countries, they start a country and the first thing they do is open up an intellectual property division, because of a lot of clients with big products want to patent and trademark everywhere in the country, everywhere in the world, so they get business like right away. And so it's a very critical area for people to be able to protect their ideas. If you don't patent an idea, you have nothing, and it's critical to your business and the assets. If you watch Shark Tank, like the first question they ask is, "Do you patent anything? And do you have any protection?" And so this is very important. And I think that it's something that too few people, the amount of people come to us and say, "Oh, I had this great idea and I had that idea and didn't do anything about it." And it's like, why didn't you do anything about it? They have no. I just didn't think, whatever it was. It's like it's such a mistake these people make, whether they telling the truth or not. They just you have an idea, you gotta protect it, and it's something that's important to do. And when the exciting thing is when you get the patents issued for people, it's you see the excitement of how important this was and how it's made such a difference in their lives. And we had one person, a friend of ours, who did a medical patent that became fairly standard being used, and he's like, my whole life changed dramatically. The fact, and that one was not an easy one. The patent office actually rejected it, and we had to do an appeal, and said that the patent office was wrong, and we won on appeal. We had another patent which was written up in the New York Times, in which we my father, bless him, came up with an idea with a breakaway cleat, that people would play sports and then they would tear their the ACL because their foot got stuck in the grass. And he said, why don't you have a cleat that just breaks apart so your foot wouldn't get stuck in the grass? And the patent examiner was like, oh, every cleat breaks away after a certain amount of pressure. And he's like, no, this is designed to break apart. It's not like that. And so we had to go to Court of Appeals, and we won in the Court of Appeals and said, yeah, this is designed to break apart, unlike something that just maybe break under extraordinary pressure. And so we got the patent, and it was written up in the New York Times. And we had another patent that Farmer's Almanac wrote as one of the top 20 inventions of all time that we got patent issued. And I don't think it's one of the top 20. I think the person just is a big golf fan and was excited about how we got what they got. But we got a patent for a ad on the bottom of a golf hole. So eventually, I guess they didn't believe in gimmies, so that they would have to make sure they hit eventually in the hole. And it's a high-end clientele. They get in the hole, they go lift up the ball, they see an ad. and we got him the exclusive rights to do those two ads on that bottom of the golf hole. And that Farmer's Almanac was just thought this was one of the greatest pads they ever saw, and then we were the ones who got the patent for it.
Wow, those are some great stories. Hey, how do you approach negotiations and dispute resolutions in the context of intellectual property matters?
So the general rule I have is that I would like to treat people like they're treating me. So people are very kind and gentle. I'm kind and gentle with them. If they talk tough and act like they're really tough, then we talk tough back. And so we try to meet them with how they are. We always try to start out very nice and prefer that be the way everything is. But if they talk like that they're tough, we find that when we talk tough back, then they drop the level and become easier to deal with. And if we don't talk tough back, they think they can push you around and bully you. So that and also it's all about leverage in negotiations. It's sometimes you have a lot of leverage in who your client is, and sometimes your client doesn't have much leverage at all. So you have to be aware of where your client is and what leverage they have in the negotiations and what they'll accept, and work through that. But there's different parts of negotiations. Very important to know how to negotiate.
Are there any common misconceptions about intellectual property protection? And do you find yourself having to educate clients about the value of that?
Well, one of the things that's very common, and we hear it all the time, fairly often from clients, which is that I made this change from what someone else is doing. Can I use this, especially for copyrights, for example? Or I have this name for a trademark, and it's a little different from this other name in the same business. Can I use this name? And I say to them, if you were the other company, would you think that you could use that person's name? Did you think they got some protection for what they had? Wasn't it broad enough to cover this? Isn't this too similar? I said, put yourself in the other person's shoes, and what would you say if you were them? And a lot of times that works. It gets them to understand that the standard in trademarks is a likelihood of confusion. And so that means that it's not a question whether it's a similar name. It has to be in a similar business, unless it's famous. So that's the standard there. And then for copyright purposes, it's a substantial copying. So it's whether it's a usage is substantially copied from some previous usage. It could be a paragraph or two, but it was done verbatim, and that was a violation of copyright law.
As I mentioned, you've been past president of the National Council of Young Israel. What kind of an impact has that had on you in your career?
Well, what happened was I got me doing the Young Israel trademark, protected as the most famous name of synagogues in the country, or the world even. It also got me different, some different Jewish clients that were fairly prominent that wanted to do trademarks. So one of them I got before I became president, which is the most famous Jewish children's singer in the world, Uncle Moishi. And so I ended up protecting his name. And one of my favorite stories about it was that he did all these videos for kids, like little kids, and so we would use those videos to try to keep our kids entertained. And especially me, when my wife would go out and say, when our kids were little, like, you got to watch the kids, I'd go put that Uncle Moishi video in. And one time, my kid's like 3 years old and saying, I want Uncle Moishi. He's complaining, I want Uncle Moishi. And I'm trying to put the video in, get everything started, and he's screaming and crying, and he wants this video. And all of a sudden, my phone rings, and it's Uncle Moishi on the phone. So I take the phone, and I give it to my kid. And I said, "Here's Uncle Moishi," and he stopped crying immediately. He was in shock that it was the real Uncle Moishi on the phone. So they have some fun things like that can happen, but it's I think that it got me helped get me certain Jewish clients that I would not have gotten otherwise. But it's something that it was an interesting experience, because I got to, as president, all of a sudden I get quoted in the newspaper for statements I would make, and one on these different trips, what's called the Conference of Presidents of major Jewish organizations to Israel, and meet the leaders of Israel and have asked questions of them, and get tours of different locations in the country and hear from all these different briefings. So that was a very interesting thing. I got to do it for like 8 years. So I was elected and reelected a couple of times. So it was fun experience, a lot of pressure in some ways, and Took a lot of time, but it was very interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like a great experience. Hey, I have one more question for you, but first, tell me how people can find out more about Weiss and Moy.
So we have the website weissiplaw.com. That's Weiss, I as in Indiana, P as in property, well, intellectual property, IP is intellectual property, and then law.com. And so, and our regular phone number is 480-994-8888. And that's for our office phone number. And they can just go on the website, read about what we do, and call our office. And we do generally have free consultations. And again, then we give people flat fees. The first step you have to do for a patent, for example, is the item patentable? People can have ideas and they're not patentable. But that's the first step before we can go to the next step of whether to do a search or file the application. And for trademarks, is explain what a lot of attorneys don't even understand what patents and trademarks are. So it's but that's it's fun to talk to all these different people. We do from individual clients to big companies that we represent, and each one has a unique aspect to it that is interesting to work with.
Last question for you. What advice would you give to someone who is an aspiring intellectual property attorney and who was looking to build a successful career in the field that they wouldn't maybe learn in law school? They could only learn from, the experience that you've had over 25 years.
Well, I think the what you don't learn in law school is how to deal with clients. I think that's the in essence the most important thing is listening to the client and giving advice to the client. It's something that the law is not like everything is so clear cut on some issues, and I think that a lot of times you have to make sure you deal with what the client wants to do, and also there are times where you explain to the client, look, at your chances of getting this trademark are not good. And they say, we want to file anyways. Well, that you can do that. You can still file if the chances are not great, as long as you let the client know these are the chances. But people file and don't tell the client, then you're going to have major problems with the client. The client thinks I'm going to get this trademark, you're not going to get it. So you have to be very upfront and very honest with them. Let them know that the chances are good or not good, what you think, and you have to know how to and tell the client, look, I think you're going to have possible problems. You need to change your name. You don't want to have these problems. You're a new business starting out, and so I think the main thing you don't learn in law school is how to advise clients. I think it's a critical element, and I think it's something that they don't know really teach you. They try to teach you the law, but they don't teach you how to deal with the most important aspect, which is representing a client, because what you read in the textbooks is not a textbook case that comes up. And I think that's very important. And I think unlike one other thing, by the way, I just did my first book, just came out.
Okay.
So it's not a legal book, but it's a book on I was involved because I was doing as part of my outside interests of which led me to become president of the National Council of Museums. I used to be the president of the Young Israel of Phoenix, and I got involved with Senator John Kyle's office when he was doing the Jerusalem embassy legislation, and I was like an advisor to his office, outside advisor about it. And so I wrote a book about the whole legislation of moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, that's recognition as the capital of Israel and in essence, the Jewish right to Israel. And Senator Kyle did a foreword for the book, and Senator Joe Lieberman did a blurb on the book, and so did Alan Dershowitz and Ambassador David Friedman and Mike Huckabee and other people. And so it was just came out a few months ago on Amazon. At JerusalemRecognition.com is the website for it. And so it's been very exciting to all of a sudden start being on TV and radio and trying to promote the book.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I'm sorry, what's the book called again?
So the book is called Because It's Just and Right. Let me just show you a picture of it. I think I have it.
Okay.
Have it here. Maybe someone put it in draw. See if they did that. All right. Thought I had it here, but anyways, all right. It's because it's just and right. The untold backstory of the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel and the moving of the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. And the title came from when people would ask Senator John Kyle, why are you pushing this issue of moving the embassy to Jerusalem? And his response would be, because you're not Jewish, why would you care? And he said, because it's just and right. So that was his response to it. So that's what we gave as the title of the book. And it's more of the story about Senator Kyle and his actions. And it also talks about actions of then Congressman DeSantis about hearings on the issue, and then the decision by President Trump. So we go through that, and we go through history behind it, and there's a fascinating thing. We found out that, for example, 5 U.S. presidents supported the Jewish sovereignty over Israel in the 1920s and late 19 teens, from Teddy Roosevelt and Warren Harding and Woodrow Wilson and Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover, all the way through till then we bring that all the way through till today. And so it's a lengthy book, but it's JerusalemRecognition.com, but we think it has a lot of important information in it. And so it's on Amazon now, and we're hoping to get it on all the websites and working through those issues. We even did an audio book that we actually hired someone to do, and so that should be coming out also short.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for sharing that. Hopefully people will check it out. Hey, Farley, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time and all of your stories and your insight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen. Great talking to you too.
So long, everybody. Thanks for listening to 15 Minutes. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.